My name is Jennifer Gray Thompson, and I am the CEO of After the Fire. Welcome to the podcast, How to Disaster: Recover, Rebuild, and Reimagine. In this podcast, we bring you the very best practices, best hearts, and great ideas from other disaster-affected communities. Thank you for joining us. We're back for another episode of the How to Disaster podcast, where we help you recover, rebuild, and reimagine. Today, our guest is Louie Delaware, a mechanical engineer and contractor who went on to found the Living in Place Institute. We're thrilled to bring Louie onto the show, and we'll find out more about how his experience of construction has led him to reimagine and design and build houses that are safe, healthy, and beautiful. They're also easily accessible and designed to improve dignity for all ages and abilities. We'll find out more about how the Living in Place Institute works to make communities safer in the context of disaster and recovery in this episode. A big welcome to Louie and to our audience. If you want to find out more about Living in Place Institute, please visit the description part of this episode. And if you want to find out more about After the Fire USA, please visit us at www.afterthefireusa.org. Thank you for joining us. Welcome once again, Louie from Living in Place Institute. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me today.
You know, I was very excited to have you today because we haven't had somebody in your field come on the podcast, and it's such a critical and really universal issue that you deal with. Talk to us about Living in Place Institute. What's your mission and your vision and your goals?
Well, our vision is to basically help many different sort of professionals help their clients that may have various challenges to be able to make their homes more accessible, healthy, and safe. And at the same time, creating beautiful, functional, and connected environments. Connected has two different meanings for us. One is connecting with, say, smart technology, like what we're doing today. But the other is allowing them to connect with friends and family.
So let's start at the beginning. Like, how did you get into this place where you wanted to create this institute? What triggered that for you?
Well, it's an interesting question. My background, I'm a mechanical engineer, and for many years, I did R&D in the medical device arena, developing new products that would either save lives or make the outcome of surgery better for people. After doing that for about 20 plus years, I got tired of how long the development cycle is, along with just all the politics that go on in regards to creating kind of really new to the world medical devices. So I went off to do what most good mechanical engineers do, and that's go off and to do construction. And so I became a general contractor, did basement finishes, bath and kitchen remodels and the like. After a while, some of my clients would be asking me if we could install childproofing devices for them, because it's kind of a complex sort of thing to do that, and you only have one chance to do it right. And so I started looking into it. It was an unmet niche out here in Colorado. There's actually a trade association for childproofers. And I did that for going on, about 14 years. I actually printed a book on how to childproof your home, not just what to, but how to. And along the way, I added other safety features to my mix. One is radon mitigation, which is a real problem in many places across the country, because radon's the second leading cause of lung cancer behind smoking. And then I added on senior safety, okay? Because a lot of things you do for child safety roll over to people who have cognitive challenges on the senior side, and then started to be able to expand it from there. And my plan was to write a book on how to basically live in place. Then what ended up happening was you started realizing we could have a really big impact worldwide on helping professionals understand the real things they should be doing for their clients.
So there's so many places to go with this. And I think what I actually would like to start with, how does Living in Place Institute, let's start with people who have disabilities, because they are, this is the How to Disaster podcast. If you have a disability or you're a senior, the chances of you being in more danger of, not being able to escape a natural disaster are actually much higher. So this is something that has been on my mind for years. During our 2017 mega fires here in the North Bay of San Francisco, we actually experienced a lot of loss of life due to people who were older, who thought they could get out of their garages, but without power, they actually couldn't physically do what they needed to do in order to get the door up. And so there were many things like that happened. And so I know for my heart and many people here, we have been very concerned about how to best serve that population as well as the disabled population. Can you talk about that?
Well, let's take a little step back in regards to where I'm at. The picture you see behind me, that's of Louisville, Colorado. Okay, this is an open space area where I used to do a lot of mountain biking. On the 30th of December last year was the Marshall wildfire. The grass you see back there was at a more wet time of the year last year. And we were very wet April, May, June. And then the spigot turned off starting July. We had less rain in Colorado in Boulder County than Death Valley. That's how dry it was for the rest of the year. And all of a sudden, something happened. They don't know exactly what the cause of the fire was, but nonetheless, in the course of 6 hours, 1,084 homes were destroyed, including mine. And there's many others that were damaged because of smoke and all that sort of stuff. And some people who've gone through the damage part haven't even got back into their homes yet. Imagine that. It's going on nearly 8 months now. Mm-hmm. It's really disheartening. I really feel for them. So what we're doing at our house is to be able to make it a forever living in place home. And so we're looking at it from the standpoint of what really should be done for people from the get-go. Basically, our estimation is to be able to make a house fully accessible. It costs about 1 to 2% more at the front end, but it can cost substantially more, if not impossible to do down the road. I'm an advocate for ramps, but many times I'm not necessarily an advocate for a ramp in front of somebody's home. And the reason for that is it basically is a dead giveaway out in the street to somebody who may be nefarious to say, oh, somebody in here may not be able to fend for themselves. So what we're doing at our house, instead of having steps to go up into it, we're just having a pathway with, in some doors, no thresholds. And one door will probably have a very minimal threshold of about 1/4 of an inch. That's our front door. We're dealing with a unique front door that we can't necessarily bring it down so that it's totally flush, but notice it has a very gradual ramp going up and over it. We're doing many other things in regards to making that home so that it's appropriate for people of all ages, because from a living in place standpoint, we don't necessarily just look at it just for seniors. We look at it from the standpoint of that child that was born maybe with special needs or is on the spectrum, because those kids, those things will follow them through life. Okay, sometimes who's on the spectrum may be able to adapt to it over time. Others who are really far out onto the spectrum may not, and they can cause harm to themselves and also obviously harm to the house. Then you get into that unfortunate circumstance of somebody doing something a little bit too risky with regards to riding their mountain bike or on the skis or whatever else, and they come back home and the home is woefully ill-prepared for them in regards to being able to deal with toileting or deal with bathing, because most of the times that's going to be up on the second floor of a house if you have a 2-story home. And so how do you get a child or a young adult up the stairs that may have broken their pelvis? Those things happen. 2, obviously, that unfortunate circumstance that may end up happening to somebody that has a life-changing event, whether it's a medical condition or they were involved in an accident. Then obviously to the senior population, that they start having their capabilities are diminishing over time. So we look at it from our standpoint of being able to do this from the onset so that you're ready for anything that can happen to you, or you're ready to have a friend or relative who may be in a wheelchair or walker, the house to be prepared for them to be able to use the place. For example, one thing that, I always think of the dishwasher door, the best person to close that is a toddler. The reason being is that door is so close to the floor, they're right there. Now, if somebody's in a walker, what are they going to do to be able to go down to be able to pull that door up? Because many times you see people using walkers, their knuckles are white because they're holding on to that walker for dear life, because in essence, their life depends on that. So how are they going to lift that door? So we're putting the dishwasher, kind of a foreign concept, we're raising it up off the floor by about 17 inches. So now it's easily accessible for everybody. And then taking it from there, where do most dishes go? They go over your head. Now, how does a person who's in a wheelchair or somebody who has really difficult, the shoulders are really arthritic, deal with plates going from down low up to here? Instead, we're putting a drawer next to the dishwasher. So it's just a simple transfer, lateral transfer from the dishwasher into a drawer that has basically devices in there to keep the plates from moving around. So we're looking at everything.
Side note, I actually hadn't thought about this before, but that's just so smart. In my 20s, I worked in restaurants, and never would you see a dishwasher on the floor. It's always waist high, because you would never have an OSHA situation where you could have a dishwasher person who's constantly bending over in order to do that kind of repetitive motion work. So it hadn't really occurred to me before then, but I just think that's really smart. So thank you for that. Keep going.
Oh, and there's so many other things that we're doing, like, a lot of electrical outlets are like 12 inches off the floor. In some cases, you'll see them in the baseboard molding. And it's like, okay, how is somebody, who may have bad knees, bad hips, bad back, or have vertigo sort of things, get down that low to plug it in and then come back up again, especially the vertigo person. Now the world may be spinning around them. No, we just basically say, put the outlets at least 24 inches off the floor. Convenient for everybody to be able to plug something in, especially somebody who's in a wheelchair, without having to try to do that sort of number. I mean, again, these are just common sense sort of things that many people, especially the people who are in the trades, don't ever think about. But once they're introduced to that, it's like, why aren't all homes done this way?
I think that one of the things we're going to have to do is figure out a way to hide, electrical outlets in a way that I think part of the reason that we continue to do it is because they are then hidden behind things. But you're absolutely correct. When you think about how difficult that would be for somebody with vertigo, or, in a wheelchair, or even somebody, who just doesn't get up and down very easily, then they have to call out other people to help them with really simple tasks. And that does not build resilience into their lives. And a big part of what we like to talk about here is the resilience factor. Like, how do you actually do it as opposed to just talk about it? And so I'm really interested in, your definition of resiliency and how that informs your own work.
Well, again, the other thing that comes into play is, as one gets older, their balance is not quite the same as it was before. And yes, there are people who insist on using those step stools that have no handle on them, and they're not all that wide. And they get up and they try reaching for something, and all of a sudden they're on the floor. Now it's a choice of, let's use a podium style step ladder, okay? One that the handle actually comes up to almost like mid-abdomen, so you can hold on to something while you're trying to reach that once a year glass that you use for New Year's Eve. But again, I know that people, even though they say they won't use a step ladder, step stool, they do. And so it's a matter of making that right choice.
And like when I was pregnant, I remember I was working at a place, and this is 30 years ago, and I had to put up decorations or something, and they were like, no, don't do it. So it's also just for stages of your life when you do need more safety precautions, and to think about, you're right, like all of the different things that could possibly happen to you. So I just want to touch base really quickly. I want to first say I'm very sorry for the loss of your home and that sort of trauma, and that's a lot. And so thank you so much for taking this time. And again, just to back you up, We've been working in the Marshall Fire since 30 days post-disaster. We're very impressed by the community out there. You guys have a very engaged, a very savvy group of people who are working on these issues, but they're still really tough. It's still a very long process. And so I just want to make sure that I acknowledge the fact that you did lose your home. How did that, but can I ask though, if it's okay, like how did that experience actually inform, your, not only your desire to rebuild in a way that you can live in, you can age in place, as it were, in your case, but also what would you like people to know who are now embarking on this really already difficult process of becoming home builders when most people never intended it to do? How does living in place actually help them navigate that moment?
Well, it's at least in Louisville and Superior, many of the people who live there, they like us. We're empty nesters. Okay, we really enjoy the community, enjoy being near Boulder and hop, skip, and a jump down to Denver, and then all the outdoor amenities that the mountains offer to us. And most of these people want to come back into that environment. But some may be a little bit older, and the circumstance for that is it's kind of like how I dealt with my parents. I'm in Colorado there, and they were in Illinois. And every time I got a phone call from a number of their area code that I didn't recognize, I'm thinking immediately it's a fireman, a police officer, somebody at the hospital. Your dad fell, he's got, a bad contusion, whatever. And so from that standpoint, the adult children of parents sometimes become a little bit more leery. It's like, Mom, you know what? Maybe you and Dad shouldn't be living in this house because you're probably going to do it the same way you had before. And I know full well it's, I think of it as a death trap for you. So now at that point, it's like, okay, how we look at our house after the fire took everything away from us is we now have the opportunity of looking at the house as the house is our oyster. Okay, like the world is our oyster, the house is our oyster. We get to be able to do things in that house and be able to show many other people the features that they should be considering using, because our house is going to be more or less like a model home until we actually move into it. But there's going to be lots of videos. There's going to be, open houses for people to come to walk through the house to be able to experience. We may not have all the necessary features built in, but we're making the accommodations for those features down the road. For example, our lot's not big enough to have, say, a ranch style home. And so what we're doing is it will still be 2 stories up and one in the basement. We're making provisions to the structure, the structural aspect of the home, to be able to allow for a future elevator. Because it's a lot more difficult to be able to deal with that sort of change, having that shaft there after the house is done. We're basically doing it from the get-go. So again, we're not having to, how are we going to do the trusses? How are we going to deal with the floor joists? What are we going to have to do in the basement because there's that concrete there? What are we going to have to do there? We're building that in. Even though the elevator may not be in as we move in, it'll be there, along with many other features that are hidden, like doing appropriate blocking behind the walls, where we anticipate having things like grab bars or tilt down devices to be able to get you up, or a shower seat, tip up shower seat, all those sort of things.
So one of the things that's on your website is not only are you looking for how to sort of build resiliency into the ways that homes are built in order to accommodate a variety of different situations, but that it can be beautiful. Can you talk about the beauty factor of it?
Well, and obviously in some cases it depends on one's budget, but nonetheless, it doesn't, to me, I'd rather see a home not look like a hospital room or rehab center where everything is just pure stainless steel or white. Okay, that's basically depressing for a lot of people, because I come home from where I was at after I broke my hip. I had emergency surgery. I was moved over to rehab to allow me to recover and then have my home necessarily modified, but all they used were the most inexpensive grab bars that they could get. There are a lot of great looking grab bars today that come in all sorts of different finishes and colors. to be able to match your decor in your room. Again, it doesn't have to be that institutional look that most people don't want to have.
That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about it, that maybe there were attractive grab bars out there, to be clear. Like, it just hadn't really factored into my own thinking. And I know that, during the pandemic, a conversation that we had with my in-laws was about, aging in place and how to sort of prepare for that. And really they were feeling your own vulnerability as you grow older. I think this is one more way to build in resilience and to not really sacrifice aesthetics. But again, it's if you can't afford it. And we do know that the more people adopt something or a technology, when there's a market for it, somebody will reach in there and fill not only that need, but one hopes bring the cost down as well. So I was very curious when you were mentioning, about autism and how homes are constructed, and what factors go in there to actually build resiliency for perhaps your autistic child or sibling, or whoever that person is in your life.
Autism is a tough one to deal with because again, there's a reason why they call it the spectrum.
Yeah.
There are some kids that are, more adept. And then there's other ones that are non-speaking and incredibly physical. And so that's a hard one to build in unless you already have that circumstance. When I was doing childproofing, I would end up being called in for kids that were in their teens that were doing things that I would never think an individual would be able to do using their heads. This one child, this teenager, was using his head to basically headbutt a wall. And they were at that point like, what do we do? We're constantly fixing these divots in the walls. He doesn't seem to have any pain factor. Okay. And so from that standpoint, every child is different. But from a special needs standpoint, where a child may not, have all their functions, maybe they only have one arm, or they have cerebral palsy and the like. There's a lot of things that can come into play to be able to make the transition through their life much easier, because in some cases, again, child may have cerebral palsy or other sort of really debilitating circumstances that eventually that parent's not going to be able to lift that child out of a wheelchair. Now you may need to either have a Hoyer lift, which is just basically a hydraulic sort of lift, or a lift that's overhead, a motorized lift that's on a track to be able to pick up that child or adult for that matter and have them be able to be taken to a toilet and carefully drop down, and then to be able to get them out to, where they may have a lift to take them from one story to another. But again, these are things that, for the grace of God, go any of us of having those sort of circumstances that may happen in life.
Your words actually reminded me of a friend of mine who unfortunately lost her son this year, but one of the challenges that she was facing is that she's pretty tiny and he was 6'6". And, when he was on the spectrum, very loving, child. And when he would have a seizure, like, she couldn't actually attend to him in the way she wanted to because he was just so large. And those are things that none of us really like to it's really just my empathy and compassion for a mother who is about 5'2". What can you actually build into your home design that could help somebody like her actually help her son? And so that was making me think about it just then. But I'm not, and I don't know what any of those answers are, but I do think it's important that we acknowledge that a lot of us have circumstances. It's really pretty common where there are mobility issues, where there are accessibility issues. Sensory issues are really big if you are on the autism spectrum. That's often an issue. So things that might be able to be built in and maybe thought about when they are much younger so that they can sort of also age in place much like a senior. So my next question for you is, having experienced, a disaster and having lost your home and now your home is your oyster, do you have like top 3 recommendations of 3 simple things that people could do as they are rebuilding their homes and their lives to build in more physical resiliency in their rebuilds?
Well, the first is don't be in denial that you're going to stay this way forever. It's not going to be that way. your physical capabilities, your vision capabilities, your hearing capabilities will diminish over time. And so it's basically thinking of, what do I need to do? Say from a vision standpoint, someone who's age 60 needs 3 times more illumination than they did at 20 to be able to see the same thing. It's one of the reasons why you see people bring out their smartphones in restaurants to be able to read menus, because it's printed on parchment paper with fine italic print, and it's almost impossible to see. But notice, to be able to have much brighter lighting in the home with dimmers, to be able to allow it to be brought down to an appropriate level now, but with the anticipation that, say, 10 years down the road, I'm going to need a lot more light. The other is, again, preparing, especially the bathroom area. That's the room that the most number of falls happen. Unfortunately, people are still thinking that I can use a bathtub or even a shower with a curb. And, it's a wet environment. They go in, go out, something's bound to happen. And there's going to be a bad injury there. Along those same lines, in bathrooms, we don't recommend having the door, like most bathrooms, that swing in. And the reason for that is, if somebody stumbles and falls against the door and gets hurt, how are you going to be able to rescue them? You're not. You're going to have to wait for the first responders to come there and get out a saw to be able to cut off that door for you to be able to get access to them. In the meantime, they're writhing in pain. They may be in shock. And so have the door open away from that closed room. I mean, again, simple things. Again, back in the bathroom, preparing for the potential of having grab bars down the road. Don't necessarily rely on the studs in your bathroom, because you may hit something that may be like a crack in the stud. You think the screw is secure, but it's not. Or if you live in moist areas, like down deep south, over time, sometimes that wood rots, just because of moisture that's there. And so think of having other means of being able to basically mount those grab bars or other devices that you have in the bathroom. So again, it's thinking in advance.
I love that. We're actually going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back with more from Louie and from the Living in Place Institute.
Fannie Mae provides mortgage options for you and your family. If you have a mortgage owned by Fannie Mae, you may have financial options available after a disaster, such as forbearance plans, deferral of payments, lending assistance, and counseling. Find out more from our Disaster Response Network. Go online at www.knowyouroptions.com/relief or call 1-877-833-1746 today.
And here we are back once again on the How to Disaster podcast. With us today is Louie, who is the founder of the Living in Place Institute. We're very happy to have Louie on the podcast today, because we're looking at something that we haven't really looked at in depth here on the podcast, which is, how do you build resiliency in your home to not only make it more livable, but also safer while you're living in it. And if you're doing that, then you also could build in certain ways that you could evacuate sooner, ways that accommodate accessibility and different issues. And then especially for seniors, we've seen a lot of senior mortality, quite frankly, in the era of mega fires over the past 5 years. This is a huge concern to us. So I think this is a very important conversation, and I appreciate you being on the podcast today, Louie.
Thank you.
So one of the things I did want to talk about is one of our services to other states is that we actually pull all the legislation to share with Oregon. And then when Colorado happened, we pulled all the California and Oregon legislation and sent it off to the lawmaker who requested it in Oregon, just so that they can get an idea of what can be done at the state level. A friend of mine named Cheryl Deem, who lives here in Sonoma Valley, she was very alarmed during the 2017 fires because she was not able to access her garage door. And, Cheryl is super savvy and very connected and knows a lot of people. And she actually worked with State Senator Bill Dodd, who is in our district, to pass a law statewide that all new construction had to have a backup battery for the garage door. And so I'm hoping that we see that in other states. Have you heard anything about that in the state of Colorado, Louie?
No, I haven't, but I do know that similar story that you just mentioned. In my neighborhood of 58 homes, there was a widow that was living there. And obviously in a major catastrophe like a wildfire, they're going to turn the power off to the entire town, as what probably happened with your acquaintance. This happened to her, and with 105-mile-an-hour winds, you're not going to be able to outrun it. And so she went to the garage thinking that she could get out. Nope, she couldn't. She was lucky enough to be able to get through 911 because the cell phone networks, I kept trying to call my wife, my adult kids, because I stayed behind to videotape my home, the contents of my home as the fire was encroaching upon it. I don't recommend doing that. I recommend doing it in advance, but nonetheless, she was able to get through to 911. It took a while for them to get there because the streets were gridlocked, but nonetheless, a fire person got to their house, pulled the cord, lifted the door, because I don't think she would have been able to lift the door either. Got her out, closed it down behind her, and left. But yeah, I mean, it's that sort of thing that comes into play. I'm not aware of any legislation. This is like, with the exception of some smaller fires in Colorado Springs about 8 years or so ago, this is really like the biggest urban wildland sort of event that Colorado's had. So undoubtedly, it's probably going to be in the front center when our state government comes back together.
I believe that it will be. They were actually really generous in their assessment of, being able to just have all of this in one place. And it's really important to us that they do like peer to peer. That's a big part of our model is, if you've been through it, then just share what you know. It's all adaptable. It's not prescription. We don't believe in that. But we do think that certain things could really help all communities to build resiliency, even in states that don't feel like they're vulnerable. We had a lot of wildfires in Oklahoma, a resurgence of wildfires in New Mexico last week. We've had wildfires in Kansas. So, in Florida is actually the #2 place that is most at danger for wildfires. And so something to think about if you're listening to this podcast, but you're not in really what you think of as a traditional wildfire vulnerable area. This is always good, especially when we do have issues with the power grid, because what most people don't understand is you also lose cell phone service in disaster. It's very common in wildfire disasters. They're not just flooded out, they're actually often burned down. If you have a landline now, keep your landline as long as they will service it, because that is really the most resilient thing you can do. Another thing we recommend, which I have, and I have and my in-laws, then my aunt and uncle-in-law, my mother are all, between 73 and 80. And so one of the things that I did last year was I bought two-way radios that I knew would work on our geography for 30 miles. And then I distributed them throughout the household so that if something should happen, that each of them have one too, that they would be able to communicate, because that's another way that we not only build resiliency in, but it also avoids just a whole host of nightmares. And I'm so glad that you brought up videotaping your home. So that's good. If you can do it, though, not under duress, that's even better.
I don't recommend it. So one other thing I want to bring up, you had asked about other ways to do resiliency.
Yeah.
There's what we're doing at our house is we're going to have a covered patio. And that's great from, staying out of the sun and the like, and be able to be outside maybe when it's a light rainstorm. But the real reason why we're doing that is if there is indeed a fire, and we aren't all that adept, and we all know that today fires spread so much faster than they did in the past because of all the synthetic materials that are used in the home. Even if I was able to get to the elevator and go down, I probably won't make it out the front door because I'd probably be overwhelmed by the basic toxic gases that are there. So that covered balcony, the covered porch area on the first floor doubles as a balcony on the second floor, so that it's right off of our master bedroom. And so if there's indeed a fire, we can go out onto that and grab our cell phone, call 911, or to hopefully do it as we're leaving the room on a landline, as you mentioned, but to be way away from that smoke and start telling the fire department, hey, first thing you need to do when you get here is we're on the back balcony.
That's great. Actually, I hear you. And I want to make sure that people know that all of the advice that we give here on the podcast is the opinion of the person and of my opinion, but to make sure you do your own due diligence and that you take a look at Louie's website. We are linking it below in the descriptions, but really to think about, what possible things in my particular scenario where I live could I do to actually build in that resiliency like you've done with your covered porches. My only concern with that is, we see 3-story houses go up in 3 minutes. And so with mega fires burn so much hotter and faster, like you mentioned, than traditional house fires. So when we think of a house fire, it doesn't burn as hot. You can often keep the foundation. It's really not true in these mega fires. And so to be prepared, say you only had, 30 to 90 seconds to leave your home, what would that look like in your top 3 things, including having a plan for your animals? It's really important. One of the biggest heartaches and biggest points of trauma that we experience in this work is people who have, this is after people losing their lives, of course, but is people who have lost their animals. And unfortunately, it's a very common scenario. So I just had to
Talking with firefighters, you'll see older individuals that they're trying to find their cat or their dog, which is already scared, and they end up finding them perished at the front door because they're calling for them and they're not coming because they're just too scared themselves. So, like the other thing that, for people who live on a single level, what we also basically, we suggest having is if your bedroom's there, you may not want to go out into the house because again, that smoke may be so thick. You need to have a secondary door with a pathway, gradual pathway off of your first floor bedroom to be able to then get you away from the house. So again, is always, like firefighters will say, always have 2 ways out of any sleeping room, because you never know if you touch that door, that rule of thumb, if you touch it, if it's warm, you don't want to go. Okay.
Yes.
Then what are you going to do? And if you're someone who doesn't have all of the physical capabilities of, say, a younger individual of being able to, say, go out the window with a fire escape ladder, I'm not about to suggest that to when my mom was alive at 94, go out this way. It's like, no, I'm not going to suggest that for her. But again, you need to be prepared for all sorts of scenarios as to what comes into play.
And also buy yourself some time. Like since all these people are, we have so many people across the American West who are sort of in the position where you are, even if they are sometimes years ahead, they still haven't begun the rebuilding process. But to look at things like, venting in your home should be fire safe, which means very specific things. In addition to Louie's website, we highly encourage people to go to the IBHS website, ibhs.org. They're a nonprofit that does a lot of science-based research on how to actually stay safe that can apply to absolutely anybody's home. So I like the extra layer though, and the extra consideration for people who are more vulnerable for a variety of reasons. So I really thank you for your work, Louie. I'm wondering if there is anything that I haven't asked about today that you wish that I had asked.
Well, okay, all homes should have smoke alarms. Okay. The newer ones that are out there that tie into like the Google Nest devices, they'll tie into those smoke alarms, and carbon monoxide alarms have a number of neat features to them. And one, first off, is they will do a monthly self-test. I talk with firefighters, like, how often do you test your own smoke alarms? And they sheepishly say, once a year when I change the batteries, even though it says to test it monthly. Okay. But more so, it'll tell me which room this event is in. Okay. Because I can program it. It's going in the basement bedroom, or it's going into the office or whatever. But then on top of that, it will tie in if you have a Google thermostat, a Nest thermostat. What will end up happening is if it senses either a carbon monoxide or a smoke event, it'll turn that furnace off. Because the furnace is going to end up, because if it's still running, that fan is pulling air from inside, return air through the furnace and then circulating it through the entire house. So to me, that's really a wonderful way to be able to minimize peripheral damage as a result of just exposure to smoke. Maybe you can try to keep it contained in one room. Okay, great, something happened there, we're out of the house. but it's not pushing smoke everywhere, because we all know, boy, that when that smoke gets onto things, it's really hard to remove.
It's almost impossible. I think that that's one of the things we've seen a lot in the Marshall fire, because it is a suburban grassland fire. It's very similar in some ways to our fires in the Tubbs fire that went through suburban areas and ate up a lot of homes in a very short period of time. I so appreciate you bringing up these smoke alarms and carbon monoxide alarms. I actually bought one for my mom this year that talks to her, and it will actually verbally alert her if there is any carbon monoxide or smoke in the house. I think she was a little bit insulted at first, but I was like, hey, this is just a simple thing that makes your life easier. And just in case you think it's just chirping because it needs a new battery, it's going to actually tell you what's going on. So I appreciate that.
Well, the similar story to that is, when like for me, my mom wouldn't let me install a grab bar for my dad. My dad really needed it. And so in some cases in life, it's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission.
Mm-hmm.
And then, I went to Chicago, came back a few months later. It's like, my mom is like, I really like these grab bars. It's like, but the way sometimes you approach that is, Mom, we're not installing this for you. We're installing this for when your friend Sue comes over. We all know Sue's weren't using a walker. Can you imagine what the challenge is for her to get off the toilet back onto a walker? How easy do you think that is? And what would happen if she fell? Oh, let's put those grab bars in right now.
Yeah, I love that. It's also one of the things I talked to my in-laws about was like, how do you take care of your future self? Do how do you, and my in-laws are really active and healthy, but at some point they're going to need more help, and not everybody likes the idea of somebody taking them to, go to the bathroom or to bathe. And so if you can, again, like build resiliency in through these methods, then absolutely do that. And if you can afford to make them more aesthetically pleasing, then absolutely do that. Like, you don't have to wait to be in the stage where you need them to actually implement them. So I love that advice, and thank you.
Yeah, one is, as we know, one of the very hot items during the pandemic was bidet seats. Hey.
Yes.
Okay. So one of the things
I have too, but I've had them for years, and we never had a toilet paper. I was like, whatever you all with your toilet paper issues, we don't have them.
Well, the thing is that for older individuals, especially if, say, mom or dad are living with you, they will draw the line to basically say, you're not helping me with my toileting hygiene. Okay. At that point in time, it's like, okay, I'm going to assisted living. Whereas having something like a bidet seat allows them to be able to continue staying in an environment that may be better for them.
Yeah.
Okay. In some ways. Again, I would not want to have another pandemic happen to, these extended facilities, assisted living facilities and like, because it was truly a prison. It was locked down. You couldn't leave your rooms. So the other thing that I recommend from a resiliency standpoint is induction cooktops. Okay.
Oh, interesting.
And the reason for that is, if you take a pot off of it, after about 15 seconds or so, it turns off automatically.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so, many times people forget with a gas burner or electric burner.
Yeah.
As they're removing it, to turn it off at the same time. I'm guessing you've never done that yourself, Jennifer.
Oh, I just did it the other day, and my husband came out to me because I had made his coffee in one of those little European things, and I had left it on. But I usually don't. My only thing that happens here is that, like, when we do our kitchen remodel, probably 2 years, because we have another thing to do before that. When we lose power here, we don't lose gas. And so that's one of the harder things is, once we put in, solar with the battery backup, then I'll feel more comfortable with an induction top. But it's a very hard thing. If all of your systems are built upon electricity, it's the right thing to do ecologically. But from a practical standpoint, where I live, where we have a lot of mega fires, it's a little harder, because when we lose power we had at one point 6 days where we didn't have power just because of a public safety power shutoff, which more and more people are going to experience. So I hear you on the induction, and my husband won't be mad that you brought that up.
Well, the thing, at least for the Marshall wildfire, was electricity and gas were turned off right away. And it took days for them to come back, because they had to go through and cap all of these leaks that were happening as a result of, the open gas lines. So yes, I appreciate where you're coming from. But at the same time, like here, we're being kind of, depending on which level of the International Energy Conservation Code you go with, you may not be able to have gas heating in your home. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, there is the provision that if you have gas coming to your house, that you could do a gas tap for a backup generator.
That seems fair too. We all have to adapt, and that's fine. And so I have a backup plan for actually how to build the resiliency in, but I just wanted to mention that for people in the audience who are like, yeah, but here's what happened in our situation. I'm glad you brought up bidets. My in-laws have one now, and I'm very happy about that too. And besides, it's just better for the record. Everybody out there, you should just do that. And they can be as low as $25. They can just be attachments, or they can be $1,000. So there's really a huge range of what's available out there. I really want to thank you, Louie, for coming on the podcast today. You sort of filled a gap in our service delivery model of trying to find, all the whole 360 view of resiliency and recovery and rebuilding. And I appreciate your dedication to your own cause and the mission, because, it's so important to remember that we are not all built the same, but there's always something that we can do.
Absolutely. And again, it's a lot easier to do it proactively than reactively, because if you had a major injury, they're not going to let you out of the rehab center until your home is appropriate for your new needs. And as we know right now, with labor shortages and material supply issues, you could be stuck in a rehab center for a really long time. And it's not a place most people like to be at, because they're constantly checking on you, prodding you. It's not the conducive environment for living in place.
Yeah, not ideal. And it's always a good idea whenever you can in this life to take care of your future self. So thank you. And for all of you out there, again, if you have any questions for Louie or about Living in Place Institute, you can visit the description of this podcast. If you want to know more about our work at After the Fire, that's www.afterthefireusa.org. And once again, thank you, Louie from Living in Place, for being on the podcast today, and for everything that you're bringing to this, new era of how do we do resiliency in the era of mega fires and other climate-based disasters. So I really want to thank you again for being on the podcast.
My pleasure today. Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you for joining us on the podcast, How to Disaster. For more information, please visit our website at afterthefireusa.org. And if you liked this video, please hit subscribe.